Hey everybody, it's Jeremy and welcome to a new episode of Sipping with Jeremy. And today we're going to be talking about some Tennessee whiskey history and also drinking Uncle Nearest Distillery whiskeys. So starting with the Uncle Nearest story, you have to go back to the mid-1800s when an enslaved black man named Nathan Green, aka Uncle Nearest, worked for a reverend in Lincoln County, Tennessee named Dan Call. Now, besides being a reverend, Dan Call was also a shopkeep owner, and he sold whiskey out of that shop. And this whiskey, which was an American bourbon, was made by Nathan Green. What really stood out about Nathan Green's process, though, was a charcoal filtration that he traced back to Western Africa. Now, this charcoal filtration really helped pull out some of the extra fattiness or the extra kind of austere flavors of the bourbon and really just made it super smooth and really soft. Now, this charcoal filtration process is done all over Tennessee now. It is called the Lincoln County process, but this was a process that was made by Nathan Green, created by him and practiced by him before it became a traditional Tennessee whiskey practice. Now, in the 1860s, a young orphan by the name of Jasper Daniels came to work for Dan Call in his shop and was always interested about this holler that was behind the shop where he saw these wagons going in and coming out with these full barrels of whiskey, and he always saw smoke from the still back there. After asking Dan Call multiple times if he could find out what was going on in that holler, Dan Call introduced Jasper Daniels to Nathan Green. Nathan Green mentored Jasper Daniels, showed him everything he knew about how to make Tennessee bourbon, and that Jasper Daniels became to be known as Jack Daniels. In the 1860s, Reverend Call was convinced by his clergy that he needed to get rid of his still. So he had sold it to Jasper Daniels and allowed him to practice making whiskey on his facility. By the end of the 1860s, Jasper Daniels had moved the distillery down the road to Lynchburg, Tennessee, and that is where the Jack Daniels facility now stays. For years, Jasper was making whiskey with Nathan Green as his head distiller, and when he was moving the facility to Lynchburg, Tennessee, Nathan Green was like, hey, I'm a little too old to do this. I can't go with you, but here, take my son, take a couple other family members who have also learned how to make this whiskey from me, and they will help you. And that is where Jack Daniels came from. Jack Daniels whiskey came from Nathan Green teaching a young Jasper Daniels how to make Tennessee whiskey. So the most famous whiskey company came from a young man who learned from an enslaved black man how to make whiskey. Now, for a lot of us, that story is really cool. It's very unique. But it's funny that it really wasn't known throughout the United States or the world until 2016 when Clay Risen of the New York Times wrote an article about it. Now, this article was read by a woman named Fawn Weaver, who is a published author, while she was on a plane trip. And then a few weeks later, it was her soon-to-be-her birthday. Her husband, who is an executive at Sony, asked her, hey, where do you want to go? What do you want to do for your birthday? And she said, I want to go to Tennessee. I want to go to Lynchburg, Tennessee. I want to find this Dan Call facility. And the husband was shocked. He was like, we can go anywhere in the world, and you want to go to Lynchburg, Tennessee? You want to go to, Lincoln County, Tennessee to see this place? And that's what they did. Shortly after visiting the Dan Call facility, Fawn Weaver was able to purchase it. From there, she started her passion project of giving Nathan Green his full story. Now, as an author, Fawn's original idea was to come up with a book or a movie that talks about Nathan Green and his story. But unfortunately, the last part of Nathan Green's life isn't really known by anybody. Unfortunately, as a black man in the 1800s, not a whole lot of your story gets told. So it's kind of hard to have a full history of Nathan Green because there is no ending. And it's really hard to make a book or write a movie without an ending. So instead of doing that, Fawn Weaver came up with another idea. Why don't I make a whiskey in the name of Nathan Green? And that is where we have Uncle Nearest Whiskey. So the distillery is located in Shelbyville, Tennessee. And Victoria Edie Butler, who is a direct descendant from Nathan Green, is Fawn Weaver's master blender here. If you ever get a chance to go to Tennessee and you go to Shelbyville, I would definitely suggest checking out the Uncle Nearest Distillery. I was there in May of 2023, and it is a really cool site. Besides having a really nice barbecue restaurant right there, They also have the world's longest continuous bar. There's a really cool concert venue in there. I heard there's rumors about them doing more to the outside. We had just saw the still. The still wasn't processing yet, but it was ready to go. They were planning by, January of 2024 to have that as a functioning still there. And it's just a really cool facility. It's definitely something that has a lot of history of Tennessee. Fawn Weaver, being an author, make sure that there's a lot of good stories that are told at the facility that keep true to the history of Tennessee and give you some really cool fun facts too. So if you're ever in Tennessee, definitely go check it out. This is a tricky one because this is a story of an enslaved man making the most historic whiskey out there right now, and not really getting his flowers till over 150 years after it was done. And that's major credit to Fawn Weaver and her team there at Uncle Nearest, because they are getting Nathan Green's story out there. And I actually have an article, we'll put it in the links below, that talks about how I believe that the Lincoln County process should be changed, the name should be changed to the Nathan Green process. I go into a little bit more detail about why in the blog, so feel free to read that. Please share that too. But yeah, it's, the idea of this man was the reason why we have what is now called the Lincoln County process. Why isn't his name behind it? So, with the Uncle Nearest whiskeys, we have 3 different ones we will try today. We have their 1884, their 1856, and the newest expression, which is their rye. Let's go ahead and get started with the 1884. So the Uncle Nearest 1884 stands at 93 proof, and again, it is done by the Nathan Green process of charcoal filtration before aging in barrel. Let's go ahead and give it a try. As one would expect from a Tennessee bourbon that goes through that Nathan Green process of charcoal filtration, there's really no surprise about how smooth this whiskey is. At 93 proof, you're a little higher than your standard 90 proof for a bourbon, but, not too far off. And it's really soft and easy. There's a lot of toasted cinnamon flavors up front. You get a little bit more of a red apple, softer kind of shortbread cookie aspect as well. There is some soft oak char here as well. You get a little bit of that charred oak flavor. And then there's some really nice floral rye spice too. And this all kind of blends really well together, just give you a nice combination of flavors. And again, super soft. This is one that you can definitely just sip on as you're drinking it on the rocks. A little bit more of those sweeter characteristics would come out, I imagine. But yeah, this is just a really nice, easy drinking bourbon. And this is exactly what the kind of profile you expect from a Tennessee whiskey that goes through a charcoal filtration. Again, that was created by Nathan Green. Let's go ahead and move on to the 1856. So the 1856 is what you would consider the high proof bourbon from the Uncle Nearest line. This one sits at 100 proof. And I will be honest, when we were on the tour last May at the Dan Call and Uncle Nearest facility, we did ask about the years on the labels. Why is the first one 1884? Why is this one 1856? And I can't remember why they said 1884 was a specific year, but I do remember them saying that the 1856 label is an honor of kind of the idea when they do believe that Nathan Green really cracked that charcoal filtration process and kind of created the whiskey that would be known as Tennessee bourbon. And it's funny because 1866 is the first year that Jack Daniel's is said to be opened. And so, 10 years from when he started this process, Nathan Green, or when he cracked and perfected this process, 10 years later is when Jack Daniel's was making whiskey through the Nathan Green process. Let's go ahead and try the Uncle Nearest 100 proof 1856. For those of you who aren't too familiar with bourbon or whiskey in general, jumping up 7 points in proof might not sound too much. Sometimes that can really hit you. But again, because of the Nathan Green process of charcoal filtration, this is just a super smooth 100 proof whiskey as well. There are some more robust kind of flavors here. You get a lot more of that charred oak flavor up front. There's a little bit more of a brown sugar flavor profile to this one as well. A lot more dark fruit notes. You get a little bit more of kind of a cherry idea, a little bit more of a raisiny kind of aspect too. So a little bit more dark fruit, but still overall very smooth. There is, again, that floral kind of rye spice on the back end, kind of pairs with a more robust charred oak characteristic on this one, the 100 proof compared to the 93 proof. But again, overall, super smooth, really easy. This one, I could definitely see more of the fruity characteristics coming out on the palate when you throw some ice in this and let it dilute a little bit. Let's go ahead and try the Uncle Nearest Rye now. So when it comes to the Uncle Nearest rye, I will say this is the more unique one of the group, and that's mainly because this is a Canadian rye. So as I mentioned earlier in this video, the Uncle Nearest distillery, when I visited it in May of 2023, had not yet started making their own distillate. They were projecting for January 2024 being their first availability to do so, and so you'll see in the next 3 to 4 years whiskey that is made from the Uncle Nearest distillery getting put into bottle. But until then, there's kind of two ways you can go about it when you're starting a label. You can either contract or source whiskey that will be made in a similar fashion of what you will make your whiskey, or you can make distillate and then just wait 3 to 5 to 6 years for that distillate to be ready to bottle. And that's a lot of money. You're putting a lot of money into making a label, you're putting a lot of money into making a brand, and to have to wait years to get a result is tricky. So a lot of people, not just Fawn Weaver, but a lot of people out there are sourcing whiskey when they have a new distillery. But this is still Victoria Edie Butler, who is a 5th generation master blender behind the label, making sure that this is stuff that she wants to represent her family with Nathan Green's name on it. So this rye is a Canadian rye. That's kind of what makes it unique to me. I remember when this came out in 2023, I was like, oh cool, they're making a rye now too. You know, rye is getting very popular. And then I looked at the back and it's like Canadian rye. And I was like, oh, that's a little different than what I was expecting. But let's go ahead and try it now. This rye is a very good example of what just rye is to me. It doesn't have to be specifically for Canadian rye or Canadian whiskey, but to read what the flavoring of this is. It's a lot of candied fennel, it's a lot of anise up front, there's a little bit of shortbread cookie, you get some really nice oak spice characteristics here too, and then there are also some really nice rye floral flavors on the finish. So all that just combines to make a very savory whiskey. Just kind of vibrant, pops on the palate really quickly. This could go really nicely in a lot of different rye cocktails. Anything that has a rye whiskey in it, that vibrancy of this would work really well to make it pop and just kind of refreshing profile, which you don't always get with whiskey. Alright everybody, that's going to wrap up this episode of Sipping with Jeremy. Thank you for joining us. I hope you learned a little bit of something about Nathan Green. I hope you are intrigued to try these Uncle Nearest whiskeys if you haven't already. And yeah, I really appreciate y'all watching. This episode, or this brand in particular, is really close to heart to me because, you know, there is a lack of representation of the African American in the spirits world. So for someone like Fawn Weaver to read an article by Clay Risen and decide, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to A, bring the name of Nathan Green to the limelight even more than Clay Risen did, but I'm also going to find a descendant of his family and have them be my master blender so we keep the practice of Nathan Green whiskey alive. And I mentioned it earlier, but please do check out the blog post I did about changing the name of Lincoln County Process. I don't know if this little movement's going to do anything, but it's just the concept. You know, this is a man who made this. Nathan Green was an individual who made the process of Lincoln County whiskey making. Why isn't he given his credit for it? You know, why did it take till 2016 for a New York Times article to come out, for the majority of America, majority of the world, to find out that a black enslaved individual was the one who taught Jack Daniels how to make whiskey? And you have great people out there like Fawn Weaver who read that article, who then put her money behind it and said, we're going to make sure that Nathan Green gets his props. We're going to make a distillery for Nathan Green. His name is all over there. His history is all written in there, and he has his descendants working for this company. It's an amazing thing. Apparently there are still descendants of Nathan Green working for Jack Daniels too. I don't want to discredit that, but it is Fawn Weaver and Victoria Butler who are making their own label with Nathan's name on it. So I'm getting a little sentimental on this one, but that's because for me this is an important brand, and it's really cool. Fawn Weaver is doing great things with it. She is making sure that she's trying to get into everybody's face with this. And not in a negative way, she is just making sure that people know that Nathan Green was a person and that he is the reason why we have Tennessee bourbon. And also, this is going to come out way after February, but there is a really cool note for the Uncle Nearest program. While you buy Uncle Nearest products in the month of February, proceeds do go to HBCUs. And if you are in a state that carries Uncle Nearest but doesn't have an HBCU, they do pick a school to work with. For example, here in California, we don't have HBCUs. But in February of this year, proceeds did go to USC's medical school. This video might run a little long, and I do apologize for that. I just have a lot of opinions, and I do have a lot of thoughts on the Uncle Nearest brand. Editing this video might be a little trickier for myself, but I hope I am able to get the point across that, you know, this is an important brand. This is a brand with history, not only in the name, but in the spirit of it as well. And it's important to keep names like Nathan Green alive. Because for those of you who love Jack Daniels, for those of you who love any Tennessee bourbon, none of that would be around if it wasn't for Nathan Green. You know, there's one individual who created this process that is now given to a whole county, that is now identified by a whole state as how they make whiskey different, how they make their bourbon more distinct than their neighbors in Kentucky. One enslaved black man did that. And that's really cool. To me, I hope to you, and I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next from Fawn Weaver and this group. They just actually picked up a cognac company. They just bought a cognac facility. So you'll definitely be seeing some Uncle Nearest cognac finishes in the next 3 to 5 years, I imagine. Looking forward to see that. Looking forward to see what else Fawn Weaver and her crew do there at Uncle Nearest Distillery. Thank you very much for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. Y'all have a great day and drink well.